The alarm bells rang through the underground tunnels of New Sol Colony for the fourth time that day. Commander Juan pressed his back against the cold metal wall and counted the seconds between the sounds of explosions above ground. 3 seconds. 4. 5. The Vorthak ships were getting closer. 8 months had passed since the alien fleet first appeared in their sky. 8 months of hiding, fighting, and watching their home world burn. The mining colony on Kepler 442b had been a peaceful place before the war. Families worked the quantum crystal mines during the day and watched the double sunset paint the sky purple every evening. Children played in the gardens while their parents dreamed of expanding to other worlds. Now those same children huddled in the deepest tunnels, eating the last of their food supplies while the surface burned above them. "Commander, the shields are down to 12%, called Engineer Mira from her position at the control panel. The young woman had bags under her eyes and oil stains on her work clothes. She had been awake for 36 hours straight, keeping their defense systems running with spare parts and determination. Juan walked over to the main screen that showed their situation. Red dots filled the display, each one representing a Vorthak warship in orbit around their planet. 43 ships, each bigger than anything the colony had ever built. Below ground, they had maybe 200 people left alive, including the children. "How long can we hold?" he asked. Mira looked at her readings and shook her head. "Maybe 3 days if we're lucky. The main power core is failing, and I can't fix it without parts we don't have." Captain Day limped into the command center, his flight suit torn and bloody from his latest mission. His small fighter ship was the only one they had left that could still fly. Every day he went out to attack the enemy ships, knowing he probably would not come back. Every day, somehow he did. "The bastards are moving closer," Day said, dropping into a chair. "They know we're almost finished. I saw them preparing dropships for a ground attack." Dr. Nari looked up from her research station where she had been, working with samples of the quantum crystals that made their planet valuable. The crystals could store enormous amounts of energy and were worth more than gold to any civilization that could use them. That was why the Vorthak had come. That was why they would never leave until every crystal was in their hands. "I've been trying to boost our communication array," Nari said. "If I can use the crystals to amplify our signal, maybe someone will hear us." Juan almost laughed, but there was no humor left in him. "We've been sending distress calls for 8 months. The Galactic Council declared this sector too dangerous to patrol. They wrote us off." "But there might be others," Nari insisted. "Other human colonies. Other ships. The nearest human settlement is 40 light years away," Day said. "Even if they wanted to help, they couldn't get here in time." The lights flickered as another explosion shook the ground above them. Somewhere in the tunnels, a child started crying. The sound echoed off the metal walls and made everyone in the command center remember what they were fighting for. Juan had been an officer in the Korean Space Navy before he came to New Sol. He had fought pirates and raiders in 3 different star systems, but this was different. The Vorthak didn't just want to steal their crystals. They wanted to enslave everyone who lived here. They had done it to dozens of other worlds, turning entire populations into workers in their crystal mines. "Sir," Mira said quietly, "I need to tell you something. The quantum crystals in the deep mines have been acting strange." "Strange how?" "They're resonating, like they're responding to some kind of signal, but it's not coming from the Vorthak ships or from anywhere in this system." Nari left her station and came over to look at Mira's readings. "That's impossible. Quantum crystals don't just start resonating on their own." "I know what I'm seeing," Mira said. "It started 3 days ago, right after we sent that last big distress signal using the crystal amplifier." Dr. Nari studied the data on Mira's screen. The crystals were indeed showing unusual energy patterns. The frequency was unlike anything she had seen before. It was almost like the crystals were trying to communicate with something very far away. "Could it be some kind of response?" Nari asked. "Like an echo coming back to us?" Before anyone could answer, the ground shook with the biggest explosion yet. The lights went out completely for several seconds before the emergency power kicked in. When the red emergency lights came on, they could see dust falling from the ceiling. "That was close," Day said. "They're targeting our shield generators directly now." Juan looked around the command center at the faces of his people. Mira, still just 24 years old, who had kept them alive with her engineering skills. Day, who risked his life every day flying against impossible odds. Nari, who never stopped looking for answers even when everything seemed hopeless. These people trusted him to find a way to save them, but he was running out of options. "How many civilians do we have in the deep tunnels?" he asked. 173, Mira answered. 62 of them are children under 16. Juan closed his eyes and made the hardest decision of his life. Start preparing for a final stand. Move all the civilians to the deepest levels where the crystal resonance is strongest. Maybe the crystals will interfere with their sensors and buy us some time. "Sir," Day said, "what about evacuation? If we can get the children to the transport ships..." "The Vorthak have been shooting down anything that tries to leave the atmosphere for months," Juan replied. "We're not running away from this. We're going to make them pay for every meter of ground they take." Dr. Nari suddenly grabbed Juan's arm. "Wait, let me try something first. Give me 6 hours to work with the crystal amplifier. If the crystals are really resonating with something out there, maybe I can boost our signal strong enough for someone to hear us." Juan looked at the tactical display again. 6 hours might be all they had left anyway. "Do it," he said. "But prepare the defenses too. If no one comes, we'll show these aliens what humans do when they're backed into a corner." Nari ran back to her station and began working with the quantum crystal samples. She connected them to the communication array and started adjusting frequencies. The crystals glowed brighter as she increased the power, and their resonance grew stronger. "I'm going to send everything we have," she said. "Our location, our situation, everything about the Vorthak fleet. If anyone is listening, they'll know exactly what we're facing." She activated the amplifier, and the crystals blazed with blue light. The signal burst out from their planet like a lighthouse beam, carrying their desperate message across the galaxy. The message was simple. "This is New Sol Colony on Kepler 442b. We are under attack by the Vorthak Empire. Our shields are failing. We have civilians, including children. If anyone receives this, we are humanity's children, and we are dying alone. We don't expect rescue. But if someone remembers us, know that we fought to the end." The signal faded, and the crystals dimmed. In the silence that followed, they could hear the sound of Vorthak drop ships entering the atmosphere above them. Commander Juan picked up his weapon and checked the charge. Around him, his people did the same. They had sent their message to the stars. Now all they could do was fight and hope that somewhere, someone had heard them. The final battle for New Sol Colony was about to begin. 3 days passed like a nightmare that would not end. The shields finally collapsed at dawn on the 4th day, their blue energy barrier flickering once before disappearing forever. Commander Juan watched from the observation window as Vorthak dropships descended through the morning sky like metal vultures. "They're landing at the main entrance," Captain Day reported from his fighter cockpit. His voice crackled through the radio, broken by static and explosions. "Looks like a full assault force. Maybe 300 troops." Juan keyed his communicator. "Fall back to defensive position 2. Don't try to stop them all yourself." "Copy that, Commander. But I'm going to make them hurt first." Through the window, Juan watched Day's small fighter streak across the sky toward the landing zone. The ship was barely holding together after months of combat, but Day flew it like it was part of his own body. He dove between the dropships, firing everything he had, then pulled up sharply to avoid their return fire. 2 of the Vorthak ships exploded in balls of orange flame. A third one crashed into the ground, its engines smoking. But there were 2, many of them, and more kept coming. In the engineering section, Mira worked frantically at her control panels. Red warning lights flashed all around her as systems failed one by one. "Main power is down to 8%, she called out. "Life support will fail in 6 hours if I can't reroute power from somewhere else." "What about the quantum crystal generators?" Dr. Nari asked from across the room. She had been studying the crystal readings non-stop since they sent their distress signal. "The crystals are still showing that strange resonance pattern." Mira shook her head. "I can't tap into that energy without risking an explosion. The resonance frequency is too unstable." "But what if that's the point?" Nari said, looking up from her datapad. "What if the instability means something? Look at these readings from the deep mines." She showed Mira her screen. "The quantum crystals. buried deepest in the planet, were glowing brighter than ever before. Their energy output had increased by 300% in the last 72 hours, right after they sent their amplified distress signal. "It's like they're responding to something," Nari continued. "Some kind of signal coming from outside our solar system." Before Mira could respond, the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in red light. Through the walls, they could hear the sound of explosions getting closer. "They've breached the outer perimeter," Juan's voice came through the intercom. "All civilians, to the deep tunnels. Everyone else, to your defensive positions." Mira grabbed her toolkit and ran toward the tunnel entrance where families were gathering with their few remaining possessions. Children clung to their parents while the adults tried to stay calm. Everyone knew what was happening above ground. "This way," Mira called to them, leading them deeper into the mine shafts where the quantum crystals provided their own blue light. "Stay close together and don't touch the walls. Some of the crystal formations are unstable." As they walked deeper underground, the crystal light grew brighter. The resonance that Nari had discovered was stronger here, making the air itself seem to vibrate with energy. Some of the children stopped crying and stared at the beautiful blue glow surrounding them. "Miss Mira," asked a little boy named Wu, "why are the crystals so bright today?" Mira knelt down to his level and tried to smile. "I think they're trying to help us, Wu. They're trying to send a message to someone very far away." "Who?" the boy asked. "Maybe someone who can help us." Above ground, the battle was not going well. Captain Day had managed to destroy 6 more Vorthak ships before his fighter finally took too much damage to fly. He crash-landed near the colony's main buildings and was now fighting on foot with the other defenders. The Vorthak soldiers were bigger and stronger than humans, with tough gray skin and weapons that could cut through metal. But they moved slowly and seemed surprised by how fiercely the humans fought back. They had probably expected the colonists to surrender as soon as their shields fell. Commander Juan fired his rifle from behind an overturned transport vehicle and watched another group of alien soldiers advance toward their position. "Fall back to the tunnel entrance," he ordered his men. "We'll make our stand there." The surviving defenders retreated through the colony's burning buildings. Behind them, Vorthak soldiers searched through the wreckage, looking for anything valuable. They were in no hurry. They knew the humans had nowhere left to run. Dr. Nari was still in the command center when the first Vorthak soldier broke through the main door. She looked up from her computer screen where she had been tracking the crystal resonance patterns and saw the gray-skinned alien pointing a weapon at her. "You will come with us," the soldier said in broken human language. "You will tell us about the crystals." Nari slowly stood up, but her hand moved to the emergency destruct button on her console. "I'll tell you about the crystals," she said. "They're about to do something you've never seen before." She pressed the button, and every screen in the command center exploded in sparks. The Vorthak soldier fired his weapon, but Nari had already rolled behind her desk. The energy blast melted the wall where she had been standing. Emergency protocols activated throughout the colony. All remaining power was redirected to the quantum crystal mines, causing the crystals to resonate even more violently. Deep underground, the blue light became so bright that the civilians had to shield their eyes. "What's happening?" Commander Juan asked through his radio as he fought his way toward the tunnel entrance. "I activated the emergency overload," Nari replied, crawling through the ventilation shafts to escape the command center. "If the crystals are really responding to something out there, this should boost their signal 1,000 times. In the deep mines, Engineer Mira watched her instruments go crazy as power flowed into the crystal formations. The resonance frequency was climbing higher and higher, reaching levels she had never seen before. "Everyone get back!" she shouted to the civilians. "Something big is about to happen!" The crystals suddenly flashed with blinding light, and a pulse of energy shot up through the planet's crust and into space. The pulse was so powerful that it overloaded sensors on every Vorthak ship in orbit around the planet. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then, far above them in the darkness of space, something began to happen. Ships started dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Not the sleek white vessels of the Galactic Council, but crude, angular ships painted in dark colors and bristling with weapons. Dozens of them appeared in the first wave, then hundreds more. The lead ship was massive, bigger than any Vorthak dreadnought. Its hull was scarred from many battles and weapon ports lined its sides like the teeth of some metal predator. On its nose was painted a symbol that made Dr. Nari's heart skip when she saw it on her scanner: the flag of Earth. A transmission came through on all frequencies, in a voice that sounded like thunder. "This is Admiral Kang of the Human Colonial. Liberation Fleet, we received your message, New Sol Colony. Sorry we're late, but we had to stop by Earth first to pick up some friends." The Vorthak fleet in orbit around Kepler 442b suddenly found themselves surrounded by ships they had never seen before. Ships that had just traveled hundreds of light years in response to a single distress call. Ships that were very, very angry. In the deep tunnels, little Wu tugged on Mira's sleeve. "Miss Mira, are those the people the crystals were calling?" Mira looked at her scanner and saw the massive human fleet taking positions around their planet. Tears ran down her face as she nodded. "Yes, Wu. Those are our people. And they came for us." Above ground, Commander Huan heard the transmission and allowed himself to smile for the first time in 8 months. The battle for New Sol Colony was far from over. But now they were no longer fighting alone. Humanity had arrived, and they had brought the storm with them. The Vorthak fleet commander, General Thexvar, stared at his tactical display in disbelief. Minutes ago, his forces had been preparing for a simple cleanup operation on a dying human colony. Now his sensors showed over 400 unknown ships surrounding his fleet, and more were arriving every minute. "Where did they come from?" he demanded from his bridge crew. "How did they get past our perimeter?" His communications officer, hands shaking, looked up from his console. "Sir, they're broadcasting on all frequencies. They claim to be human." "Impossible," Thexvar growled. "Humans don't have fleets this size. They're a scattered species with no real military power." But even as he spoke, he could see the evidence on his screens. The ships approaching his fleet were clearly human in design, though larger and more heavily armed than any human vessel he had encountered before. Their formation was precise, disciplined, and completely unlike the desperate defense they had been fighting on the planet below. On the surface of Kepler 442b, Commander Huan listened to Admiral Kang's voice through his radio and felt hope return to his heart for the first time in months. "All New Sol defenders, this is Admiral Kang. We're tracking your positions and the enemy forces around you. Hold your current positions and prepare for immediate support. The cavalry has arrived." "Admiral," Huan replied. "This is Commander Huan, Colony Defense Leader. We have 170 civilians in the deep tunnels and maybe 30 defenders still fighting. The Vorthak have breached our perimeter, but we're holding them at the tunnel entrance." "Understood, Commander. Captain Yoon, are you monitoring?" "This?" A new voice joined the communication channel, crisp and professional with an accent Huan recognized as being from one of the Proxima Centauri colonies. "This is Captain Yoon of the destroyer Incheon's Fury. We have visual on the ground. Forces beginning orbital bombardment of enemy positions in 30 seconds. Captain Day, crouched behind the wreckage of his fighter, looked up at the sky. "Did she say orbital bombardment? But we're right next to the enemy positions." "Trust me," came Captain Yoon's reply. "We've had 8 months to practice precision targeting. Duck and cover." Beams of blue energy lanced down from space, striking the Vorthak positions with surgical accuracy. The alien soldiers who had been advancing on the tunnel entrance simply disappeared in flashes of light. Their vehicles exploded one by one as the orbital strikes continued. But the human defenders were not touched. The energy beams passed within meters of their positions without harming them. "How is that possible?" Dr. Nari whispered, watching from her hiding place in the ventilation system. Through her radio, she heard Admiral Kang's voice. "Quantum crystal targeting systems, Doctor. We've learned a few things about your crystals since we received your research data 8 months ago." "My research data? But how did you—" "Every human colony has been sending us intelligence for the past 2 years, Doctor. Every Vorthak ship, design, every tactical pattern, every piece of stolen technology. We've been building this fleet specifically to fight these bastards." In space, the real battle was beginning. The Vorthak dreadnoughts opened fire with their massive energy cannons, but the human ships moved in ways that defied normal physics. They seemed to bend and twist through space, avoiding the heavy weapons while closing distance for their own attacks. Captain Yoon's destroyer led a squadron of smaller ships in a flanking maneuver that brought them directly behind the Vorthak flagship. All ships, concentrated fire on their engine cluster. Let's see how they like fighting without power. The human ships fired together, their weapons synchronized perfectly. The Vorthak flagship's engines exploded in a chain reaction that sent the massive ship tumbling out of control. General Thexvar watched his flagship die and realized he was facing something completely new. These humans fought nothing like the scattered colonists his forces had been crushing for years. They moved as one unit, anticipated each other's actions, and used tactics he had never seen before. All ships, retreat to defensive formation Beta, he ordered. Request immediate reinforcements from the nearest battle group, but his communications officer shook his head. Sir, they're jamming our long-range communications. We can't reach the other fleets. On the planet's surface, Major Bora materialized from thin air as her cloaking device deactivated. She and her squad of drop-shock troops had been inserted during the orbital bombardment, using technology that made them invisible to Vorthak sensors. The aliens had never seen anything like them. Where Vorthak soldiers were large and slow, the human troops moved like ghosts. They appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating precision, and vanished again before the enemy could respond. "This is Major Bora to all ground units," she announced over the radio. "We're moving to secure the tunnel entrance. Any Vorthak soldiers between us and the civilians are going to have a very bad day." Commander Huan watched in amazement as the alien soldiers who had been threatening his people just minutes before began retreating in panic. The humans who had come to rescue them fought with a cold efficiency that was both inspiring and terrifying. "Commander," Admiral Kang's voice came through the radio again, "we need you to get your people clear of the crystal mines. We're going to use them as weapons." "Weapons? How?" "You'll see. Just get everyone at least 2 kilometers away from the main crystal formations." Engineer Mira helped evacuate the civilians from the deep tunnels, leading them through emergency passages to safer areas. As they moved, she could see tech specialist Jin working with equipment she didn't recognize, connecting strange devices to the quantum crystal formations. "What are you doing?" she asked him. Jin looked up from his work and grinned. "Turning your planet into the galaxy's biggest energy weapon. These crystals don't just store power, they can focus and amplify it. We're going to use them to disable every Vorthak ship in orbit." "That's impossible. The power requirements alone would require the combined output of every crystal formation on your planet, synchronized through quantum resonance and focused by this little beauty," Jin said, patting a device the size of a suitcase. "We call it a crystal resonance amplifier. Took us 6 months to build it after we analyzed the data from your first distress signal." Mira stared at the device. "You built this specifically for our planet?" "We built it specifically to save you," Jin corrected. "Every human colony matters. Every human life matters. That's what makes us different from them." In space, Admiral Kang's flagship positioned itself directly above the quantum crystal mines. "All ships, clear the resonance field. Jin, are you ready down there?" "Resonance amplifier is active and synchronized with all major crystal formations," Jin replied. "Ready to fire on your command." Fire. The quantum crystals across the planet suddenly blazed with light brighter than the sun. Energy flowed between the formations, creating a network of power that stretched across continents. Then, focused by Jin's amplifier, all that energy shot upward in a single massive pulse. The pulse hit the Vorthak fleet like an invisible hammer. Every ship's power core overloaded simultaneously. Their weapons went dead. Their engines failed. Their life support systems flickered and died. In seconds, the mighty Vorthak armada became nothing more than 43 floating metal tombs. General Thexvar felt his command ship's gravity generators fail and found himself floating helplessly in the air. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows as his crew tried desperately to restore power. "Sir," his communications officer called out. "The humans are broadcasting a message. Put it through." Admiral Kang's voice filled the dying ship. "Vorthak fleet, this is your only warning. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Any ship that attempts to restore weapons or engines will be destroyed. You have 5 minutes to comply." Thexvar looked around his powerless bridge and realized he had no choice. His empire had ruled through fear and overwhelming force for centuries. They had never faced an enemy that could turn their own advantages against them. "Signal surrender," he said quietly. On the planet below, Commander Juan stood with his surviving defenders and watched Vorthak soldiers lay down their weapons as Major Bora's troops surrounded them. After 8 months of hell, the battle for New Sol Colony was over. But as he looked up at the human fleet in orbit, Juan realized this was just the beginning. Admiral Kang had not come here just to save one colony. He had come with enough firepower to challenge an empire. The storm that had begun with a desperate distress signal was about to become a hurricane that would sweep across the galaxy. General Thexavar sat in the brig of Admiral Kang's flagship, staring through the force field at his human captors. 3 days had passed since his fleet's surrender, and he was beginning to understand that he had not just lost a battle. He had encountered something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. "Your Galactic Council abandoned you," he said to Commander Juan, who had come aboard to participate in the interrogation. "Why do these humans risk so much for one small colony?" Juan looked at the alien general with cold eyes. "Because that's what families do. We don't abandon each other." "Family?" Thexvar laughed, a harsh sound. "You are scattered across hundreds of worlds. You have no central government, no unified command. How can you call yourselves family?" "That's exactly why we're family, Admiral," Kang said, entering the room. "Every human colony chose to be part of something bigger. Every person who joined this fleet volunteered to risk their life for people they had never met. Can you say the same about your empire?" Thexvar fell silent. In truth, his own soldiers followed orders only because they feared punishment. Loyalty in the Vorthak Empire was bought with threats and violence. On the bridge of the Inchen's Fury, Captain Yoon studied the tactical data they had captured from the Vorthak fleet. The alien empire was larger than they had realized, spanning over 200 worlds, but the intelligence also revealed something important. Most Vorthak forces were spread thin, expecting no serious resistance from the species they oppressed. "Admiral," she reported through the communication link, "I'm seeing patterns in their deployment. They have major fleet concentrations at only 12 key systems. If we hit those, we could cripple their ability to respond to uprisings on their conquered worlds." "What's our force strength?" Kang asked. 437 ships of various classes, plus whatever we can recruit from liberated colonies." Dr. Nari, now aboard the flagship as Chief Science Officer, looked up from her analysis of the Vorthak technology. "Admiral, I've been studying their ship designs. They rely heavily on centralized computer systems. If we can modify our quantum crystal weapons to target their control networks, we could disable entire fleets without destroying them." "Why would we want to preserve their ships?" Major Bora asked. She had little patience for anything that might help their enemies. "Because there are human slaves on some of those ships," Nari replied quietly. "And other species, too. The Vorthak have been taking prisoners for decades." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. They had known the Vorthak took slaves, but seeing the evidence in captured data made it real. Admiral Kang made his decision. "We're not just fighting to defend our colonies anymore. We're fighting to free everyone the Vorthak have enslaved. Captain Yoon, prepare your task force for extended operations. We're taking this war to them." The first target was the Altair system, where the Vorthak maintained a major shipyard and prison complex. Intelligence showed over 10,000 human prisoners being held there, along with members of 6 other species. Captain Yoon led the assault with 30 ships, using the quantum crystal technology to approach the system undetected. The Vorthak fleet guarding Altair was caught completely by surprise when human ships materialized inside their defensive perimeter. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Vorthak fleet was disabled and drifting in space, their crews broadcasting surrender signals. But the real victory came when Major Bora's troops stormed the prison complex and found Captain Day's younger sister, Sue, among the prisoners. Day had thought she was dead for 2 years, ever since the Vorthak had raided the mining station where she worked. When he saw her walking off the rescue transport, he broke down and cried for the first time since the war began. "I knew you'd come," Sue said, hugging her brother tightly. "I told the others that humans don't abandon family, even when it seems impossible." Word of the Altair liberation spread quickly through both human and alien networks. On worlds throughout, Vorthak space, enslaved populations began to hope for the first time in years. Rebellion groups that had been hiding in the shadows started making contact with the Liberation Fleet. But the Vorthak Empire was not defenseless. Emperor Vorthak himself, the ancient leader who had built the empire through centuries of conquest, finally understood the threat these humans represented. "Mobilize the Death Fleet," he ordered from his throne world. "Bring every ship from the core systems. I want these humans crushed before they can inspire any more uprisings." The Death Fleet was the Vorthak Empire's ultimate weapon, 300 massive dreadnoughts equipped with planet-killing weapons. They had not been deployed as a group for over 50 years, not since the last major rebellion had been crushed. Engineer Mira, now serving as a technical advisor to the Liberation Fleet, detected their movement through the quantum crystal communication network that connected the liberated human colonies. "Admiral," she reported, "I'm reading massive energy signatures moving toward the Vega system. It looks like they're bringing everything they have." Admiral Kang studied the tactical display showing the approaching Vorthak armada. His own fleet had grown to over 600 ships as more human colonies contributed vessels, but they were still outnumbered and outgunned by the Death Fleet. "They're trying to force a decisive battle," he said. "They want to end this war quickly before more species join the rebellion." Tech specialist Jin had been working on modifications to their quantum crystal weapons ever since the battle at Altair. "Admiral, I think I have something that might help, but it's risky." "How risky?" "Well, if it works, we can turn their own planet-killer weapons against them. If it doesn't work, we'll all be dead in about 30 seconds. Captain Yoon laughed grimly. "I like those odds. What do you need?" Jin explained his plan. By using quantum crystals as resonance transmitters, they could potentially overload the power cores of the Vorthak dreadnoughts from a distance. But the timing would have to be perfect, and they would need to get close enough to the enemy fleet for the crystals to lock onto their energy signatures. "It's suicide," Major Bora said bluntly. "We'd have to fly straight into their formation, while they're shooting at us." "Not all of us," Kang replied. "Just one ship with enough quantum crystals to overload their entire fleet." Dr. Nari realized what he was suggesting. "You want to use my ship, the research vessel with the crystal lab?" "It's the only ship equipped to handle that much crystal energy," Kang confirmed. "But I won't order anyone to take that mission. It would have to be volunteers." Every person in the room stepped forward. "We all go," Commander Huan said simply. "We started this fight together on New Sol. We'll finish it the same way." The Death Fleet arrived at Vega 3 days later, expecting to find scattered human ships fleeing before their overwhelming firepower. Instead, they found the entire Liberation Fleet waiting for them in perfect formation. Emperor Vorthak himself was aboard the flagship, confident that his empire's greatest weapons would end the human threat once and for all. He had crushed dozens of rebellions over the centuries. These humans would be no different. "Begin bombardment," he ordered. "Show them the power of the Vorthak Empire." The Death Fleet opened fire with weapons that could shatter moons. But the human ships moved between the energy beams with impossible precision, their quantum crystal navigation systems allowing them to predict and avoid the massive weapons. And at the center of the formation, Dr. Nari's research vessel flew straight toward the Vorthak flagship, its hull glowing with the power of 1,000 quantum crystals. "Crystal resonance at maximum," Nari reported calmly. "Beginning overload sequence." The crystals in her ship began to sing, their harmonics reaching across space to touch the power cores of every Vorthak dreadnought. One by one, the massive ships began to shake as their own energy systems turned against them. Emperor Vorthak felt his flagship tremble and realized, too late, that he had underestimated these humans yet again. "All ships," Admiral Kang broadcast across the fleet, "show them what happens when you threaten our family." The Liberation Fleet struck like lightning, their weapons synchronized with the quantum crystal overload. In less than an hour, the mighty Death Fleet was reduced to floating wreckage. The Vorthak Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, had just lost its most powerful force to a species they had dismissed as weak and scattered. The storm was becoming a hurricane, and it was heading straight for the heart of their empire. The news of the Death Fleet's destruction spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On 1,000 worlds, enslaved populations looked up at their Vorthak overseers and saw fear in their eyes for the first time. The empire that had seemed unbeatable for centuries was suddenly mortal. Admiral Kang stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the holographic map that showed the collapse of Vorthak control throughout their territory. Red markers indicated systems in open rebellion. Yellow showed areas where Vorthak forces were retreating. Only a few dozen systems still showed solid Imperial control. "Admiral," Captain Yoon reported from the Inchin's Fury, "we're receiving surrender offers from 12 Vorthak sector governors. They want to negotiate terms." "No terms," Kang replied without hesitation. "They surrender unconditionally, release all prisoners, and face trial for their crimes. Or we keep fighting until every one of their ships is scrap metal." Major Bora's voice came through the communication link from the surface of Titan Station, a massive Vorthak fortress they had just captured. "Admiral, you need to see what we found here. It's worse than we thought." The recording Bora sent chilled everyone who saw it. Deep beneath Titan Station, the Liberation Forces had discovered breeding facilities where human children were being raised as slaves. Thousands of them, some who had never seen the sky or breathed natural air. Commander Huan watched the footage of children being led out of their underground prison and felt his anger burn hotter than the core of a star. These weren't prisoners of war. These were children who had been stolen from their families and raised to serve alien masters. "How many facilities like this are there?" he asked. Dr. Nari had been analyzing captured Vorthak databases. "At least 47 that we've identified so far. They've been doing this for over a century." The Liberation Fleet's response was swift and merciless. Task forces spread out across Vorthak space, following a simple rule. Any facility involved in the slave trade was to be destroyed completely. Any Vorthak official connected to the program would face immediate justice. Tech specialist Jin had modified their quantum crystal weapons specifically for these missions. The new weapons could disable a facility's defenses without harming the prisoners inside, allowing rescue teams to move in quickly. Engineer Mira led many of these rescue operations personally, using her technical skills to break into the computer systems that controlled the slave facilities. She had grown up on New Sol Colony, where freedom was the most precious thing in the universe. Seeing children who had never known freedom made her determined to tear down every wall that confined them. At the Vega work camps, she found a 10-year-old girl named Sun, who spoke only the Vorthak slave language. Sun had been taken from her parents when she was 3 and had no memory of human culture or customs. "It's okay," Mira said gently, kneeling down to Sun's level. "You're safe now. We're here to take you home." "Home?" Sun asked in broken human language. "What is home?" Mira felt tears run down her face as she realized this child didn't even understand the concept of family. "Home is where people love you just because you exist, where you're free to choose your own path, where no one can own you or hurt you." Sun looked at her with wide eyes. "Can I really go there?" "Yes," Mira promised. "And we're going to make sure no other child ever has to live the way you did." The Vorthak Empire's response to the Liberation Fleet's campaign was desperate and brutal. Unable to match human forces in open battle, they began destroying slave facilities rather than let them be captured. If they couldn't keep their human property, they would make sure no one could have it. This strategy backfired catastrophically. The other species enslaved by the Vorthak, the gentle Altarians, the proud Centauri traders, the fierce Rigel warriors, saw the humans fighting not just for their own people, but for all the enslaved. One by one, they began to join the Liberation Fleet. Captain Day found himself commanding a squadron that included ships from 7 different species. The Altarians provided medical support for rescued prisoners. The Centauri used their trade networks to supply the fleet. The Rigel warriors brought weapons and a burning desire for revenge against their former captors. "This is what the Vorthak never understood," Day said to his mixed crew as they prepared for another rescue mission. "They thought power came from making others fear you. But real power comes from giving others a reason to follow you." His target was the neutron fields, a region of space where the Vorthak had built a massive prison complex in the shadow of a dying star. The radiation from the neutron star made it impossible for most ships to approach, but human vessels equipped with quantum crystal shielding could survive the journey. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships used the neutron star's gravity to slingshot around their targets at incredible speeds. The intense radiation that protected the prison complex was turned into a weapon, focused through quantum crystals and directed at Vorthak ships. When the prison complex finally fell, they found over 50,000 prisoners from dozens of species. Some had been captive for so long, they had given up hope of ever being free. Among them was an elderly Vorthak named Korax, who had been imprisoned by his own people for opposing the slave trade. He looked at Admiral Kang with amazement when the human commander personally helped him off the transport ship. "You came for us all," Korax said in wonder. "Even for those who share blood with your enemies." "We came for everyone who believes in freedom," Kang replied. "That includes Vorthak who want to build something better than an empire built on slavery." Word of Korax's rescue spread through the remaining Vorthak territories and triggered a series of internal rebellions. Vorthak citizens, who had been silently opposing their government's policies, finally had proof that there was an alternative to the Empire's brutal rule. Emperor Vorthak, watching his empire crumble from his throne world, made a final desperate decision. If he couldn't defeat the humans, he would make them pay a price so terrible that other species would never dare oppose the Vorthak again. He activated the Omega Protocol. Dr. Nari detected the energy signature before anyone else. "Admiral, I'm reading massive power buildups on Vorthak Prime. They're charging something bigger than anything we've seen before." The intelligence came from Korax, who remembered stories from his youth about the Empire's ultimate weapon. "It's a stellar ignition device," he explained. "They can cause a star to go supernova, destroying everything in the system." "But that would kill billions of Vorthak civilians on their own worlds," Commander Juan said in horror. "The Emperor no longer cares about his own people," Korax replied sadly. "He only cares about proving that no one can defeat the Empire and survive." Admiral Kang looked at the star charts showing the systems that would be destroyed if Vorthak Prime's star went supernova. 12 inhabited worlds, including 3 recently liberated colonies with millions of newly freed slaves. "How long do we have?" he asked. "The device takes 6 hours to charge," Korax answered. "Once it's activated, the process cannot be stopped." "Then we have 6 hours to end this war," Kang decided. "All ships prepare for final assault. We're going to Vorthak Prime." The Liberation Fleet's final battle would be fought not just for freedom, but for the survival of billions of innocent lives. The storm that had begun with a desperate distress signal from New Sol Colony was about to reach its ultimate destination, the heart of the Empire that had terrorized the galaxy. And there would be no mercy for those who would murder entire worlds rather than accept defeat. The Liberation Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Vorthak Prime system like an avenging storm. Over 1,000 ships now flew under Admiral Kang's command, representing dozens of species united by their hatred of slavery and their hope for freedom. The Vorthak homeworld hung before them like a diseased jewel, its surface covered with the massive cities that had grown fat on the wealth stolen from enslaved worlds. In orbit around the planet, the last remnants of the Imperial fleet waited in desperate formation. 5 hours and 37 minutes until stellar ignition, Dr. Nari reported from her position at the science station. The countdown to disaster ticked away on every screen in the fleet. Emperor Vorthak's voice crackled across all communication frequencies, filled with ancient rage and desperate madness. "You have destroyed my empire, humans, but you will not live to enjoy your victory. When our star dies, it will take your precious freedom with it." Admiral Kang opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Kang. We didn't come this far to watch billions die because one tyrant can't accept defeat. Today we end this war, and we end it forever." The final battle began immediately. Vorthak ships, knowing they faced annihilation whether they won or lost, fought with the fury of the doomed. But the Liberation Fleet fought with something more powerful than desperation. They fought with purpose. Captain Yoon led the assault. On the orbital defense platforms, her destroyer Inchin's Fury dancing between energy beams that could vaporize mountains. The quantum crystal technology that had started with Dr. Nari's research on New Sol Colony now allowed human ships to move through space like living things, flowing around enemy fire while striking with surgical precision. Platform 7 is down. Yoon reported as another massive station exploded in silent fire. Moving to Platform 8, Major Bora's assault troops had a different mission. They were heading for the planet's surface in stealth transports, racing against time to reach the facility where the stellar ignition device was charging. Every minute that passed brought them closer to an explosion that would make the system's star go supernova. 2 minutes to surface, Bora announced to her mixed squad of humans and aliens. Remember, we're not just fighting for our own people today. We're fighting for everyone who believes they have the right to live free. The squad included Jin, who would need to disable the stellar weapon using his knowledge of quantum crystal technology, and Korax, the elderly Vorthak who knew the layout of the Emperor's fortress. Strange allies. But then this war had made allies of many unlikely companions. On the surface of Vorthak Prime, the Emperor's palace was a massive pyramid of black stone that reached into the clouds. At its heart, deep underground, the stellar ignition device hummed with enough power to murder a star. 4 hours remaining, Jin reported as they fought their way through the palace corridors. The Vorthak guards fought fiercely, but they were defending a madman's last desperate gamble. Many of them looked relieved when they were defeated, rather than forced to continue protecting a plan that would kill their own families. In space, Commander Huan coordinated the assault on the Emperor's personal flagship. The massive ship was larger than a city, bristling with weapons and protected by shields that had never been penetrated. "This is for New Sol Colony," Huan said quietly as his squadron began their attack run. "This is for every human child who died alone because they thought no one cared." Captain Day, flying beside his old commander, smiled grimly. "And this is for my sister Sue, and for every slave who dreamed of freedom but never lived to see it." Their ships struck the Vorthak flagship like hammers falling on an anvil. Quantum crystal weapons overloaded the ship's shields, while conventional weapons poured through the gaps. The Emperor's last symbol of power began to burn. Deep in the palace, Major Bora's team reached the chamber containing the stellar ignition device. The machine was as large as a building, its core glowing with the stolen power of quantum crystals from 100 conquered worlds. 3 hours, 15 minutes, Jin reported, connecting his equipment to the device's control systems. "But there's a problem. The Emperor didn't just build a weapon, he built a trap." "What kind of trap?" Bora demanded. "If I try to shut down the device normally, it triggers an immediate overload. The star goes supernova in minutes instead of hours." Korax studied the machine with old, tired eyes. "There is another way. The device can be reversed. Instead of causing the star to explode, it can stabilize it, but someone must stay to maintain the process manually." "How long?" Bora asked. 6 hours, and the operator will be exposed to lethal radiation within the first hour." The team looked at each other, and every one of them stepped forward. But it was Korax who spoke first. "This is my people's crime. Let it be my redemption." "You'll die," Jin said bluntly. The old Vorthak smiled sadly. "I have lived too long in a galaxy poisoned by my empire's evil. Perhaps my death can help heal some of that poison." Before anyone could argue, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Emperor Vorthak had abandoned his flagship and was heading for the device chamber with his personal guard. "He's trying to activate the weapon manually," Bora realized. He'd rather die taking the galaxy with him than face defeat. The battle in the palace corridors was brutal and desperate. Emperor Vorthak himself was ancient but still powerful, enhanced by technologies that had kept him alive for centuries. He carved through Bora's troops with weapons that could cut through steel. But he was one being facing the representatives of dozens of species who had suffered under his rule. When he finally fell, it was Jin who struck the killing blow, using a quantum crystal blade forged from the same crystals that had once powered Vorthak's slave facilities. "It's over," Jin said, standing over the Emperor's body. "Your empire dies with you." But the stellar ignition device was still counting down. 2 hours and 43 minutes remained. Korax was already at the controls, his fingers dancing over systems he had helped design decades before as a young engineer, before he learned what his empire truly was. "Beginning reversal sequence," he reported calmly. "You should all leave now. The radiation will be lethal soon." "We're not leaving you," Bora said firmly. "Yes, you are," Korax replied, sealing the chamber doors. "You have worlds to rebuild, families to reunite, freedom to protect. I have atonement to make." Through the sealed door, they heard him begin to sing an old Vorthak song about hope returning, after the longest winter. As the radiation levels rose and his voice grew weaker, the stellar ignition device slowly transformed from an instrument of destruction into a force for preservation. By the time the process was complete, the star that should have gone supernova was instead stabilized for millions of years to come, and Korax, the last loyal citizen of the Vorthak Empire, had given his life to ensure that freedom would have time to grow. 6 months later, Admiral Kang stood on the observation deck of New Sol Colony's new orbital station. Below him, the planet that had nearly been destroyed was thriving again. The quantum crystal mines that had once made them targets now powered a new generation of ships designed for exploration and protection rather than war. Engineer Mira, now director of colonial engineering, had overseen the construction of academies, where rescued slave children learned what it meant to be free. Former Vorthak facilities had been converted into schools, hospitals, and research centers. Dr. Nari led the scientific teams studying quantum crystal technology, sharing their discoveries freely with any species that wanted to learn. The weapons that had won the war were being transformed into tools for peace. "Admiral," Captain Yoon reported from the bridge of her new flagship, "we're receiving a transmission from the Andromeda relay. It's a distress signal." Kang smiled and looked out at the stars that no longer held the shadow of the Vorthak Empire. "What do they say?" "They're asking for help against something called the hegemony. Apparently they've heard about us. How many ships do we have ready for deployment?" 215 ships from 37 species, sir. All volunteers." Admiral Kang nodded and activated the communication system that would carry his words across the galaxy. "This is Admiral Kang of the Human Colonial Liberation Fleet. To any being suffering under the boot of oppression, know this: we are coming. We are human, and we never abandon family. No matter how dark the night, no matter how hopeless the fight, remember that the storm is gathering and it carries the wind of freedom." The message reached distant Andromeda, where new tyrants were learning that the galaxy had changed. Somewhere in that far-off spiral, enslaved beings looked up at alien stars and whispered a new word they had learned from intercepted transmissions: hope. The storm that had begun with a desperate call from New Sol Colony had become something greater than anyone had imagined. It had become the promise that freedom would always find a way, and that no one who fought for it would ever fight alone. The war was over, but the mission would never end. As long as there were chains to be broken and tyrants to be faced, humanity and its allies would answer the call. After all, that's what families do.